In May 1943, inside that wind, the gunfire on Attu Island stopped. 19 days of fighting had ended. U.S. forces held the ground, but only at a punishing cost, and for the Japanese defenders, the outcome can be captured in a single number, roughly 2,600 men, almost all killed. Those who lived to become prisoners were 28 or 29. Hold on to that contrast, 2,629. Numbers like these do more than summarize a campaign. They force a second kind of accounting, the kind that asks what a battlefield demanded and what a person was allowed to do in order to stay alive. When the survivors can be counted on two hands, this passes beyond the category of a brutal battle. It becomes a riddle with teeth. In an army where rather die than surrender was treated as iron law, why did a few dozen men live long enough to become the exceptions? To approach that question, we have to start earlier than the last ridge and the last volley. We have to understand what the words taken prisoner meant to many Japanese soldiers at the time. It was far more than a military failure. According to historical sources and summaries by the National Park Service, within that harsh moral universe, surrender was a disgrace to the individual and to his family. Bushido was pressed into an absolute. Soldiers were taught that it was better to take one's own life than to be captured. This was not merely a slogan. It became a system reinforced by training, by comradeship, by fear of judgment after the fact, and by the imagined gaze of people who would never see the battlefield. The soldier did not imagine only his own shame. He imagined it spilling outward, staining a family name, turning parents into objects of pity, making siblings and children carry a quiet burden. He could picture neighbors lowering their voices, officials writing down a new label, a household recast by a single word: surrendered. In that logic, surrender was not a choice you might make in extremity. It was a door that had been nailed shut long before the first shot. You can picture what that does in the last hours of a fight. In a soldier's mind, the roar might not be only artillery and rifle fire, but those drilled injunctions, repeated until they sank into bone. His options were bound fast by an invisible net called honor. The net did not simply restrain him. It defined the shape of the world, shrinking the space of the possible until death looked like the only acceptable exit. That is why Attu's numbers feel so extreme. They are not simply proof of fighting spirit. They are the bloody manifestation of a cultural doctrine on a battlefield. So how did those 29 men slip through the mesh of that net and fall out the other side? Part of the answer is hidden in Attu itself. The island's environment was a ruthless enemy, indifferent to flags and slogans. This was a forgotten battlefield. Fog for most of the year, wind like a blade, freezing rain that bit through cloth. Even when a man knew the shape of the ground, the island refused to show it to him. No trees, only bare rock and mud that swallowed everything. The cold of May carried wetness that sank straight into the marrow. Boots filled, hands went numb. Metal felt like ice. A man could be brave and still be undone by simple exposure. The fighting bogged down. Japanese supply lines failed. Food and medicine ran out. As the days stretched, bodies changed. Hunger made temper short and thinking slow. Frostbite and sickness turned small injuries into disabling ones. Many did not die from bullets at all, but from exposure, disease, and exhaustion, non-combat losses inflicted by the land itself. By the end, the command structure had frayed. Records describe the remnants launching a final suicidal charge, a last assault in fog and chaos. We can sketch what such terrain does to men. Visibility collapses to a few meters. Landmarks disappear. A ridge becomes a rumor. A hollow that looks shallow swallows a boot, then a knee, then balance itself. Sound loses direction in wind and mist. Units scatter, Not from cowardice, but from physics. A step too far, and a man vanishes into gray. Bodies are caked with mud. Breathing hurts. Legs feel like they belong to someone else. Orders, if they exist, arrive late or not at all. Whatever organization had held them together breaks into a handful of separate struggles, each one private, each one desperate, and in that absolute confusion, chance takes over. One soldier is knocked unconscious by a grave wound and misses the last moment. Another staggers offline and wanders, utterly lost in the fog. A third finds himself pinned behind rock, unable to move, the world narrowing to breath and pain. Someone else at the physiological limit of hunger and cold simply loses the strength to stand. None of this requires a change of belief. It requires only a body reaching its edge. The battlefield shrinks from ordered opposition into a chaotic inferno. Survival sometimes has nothing to do with conviction. It looks more like cruel randomness, luck in its most indifferent form. Then the gunfire stops. The charge ends. The shouting drains away into the wind. They are still alive. And then, as U.S. troops clear the field, they move through fog and wreckage, checking bodies, stepping around discarded gear, calling to one another in clipped bursts. Some carry stretchers. Others carry the simple tools of confirmation, a touch at the neck, a glance at the chest, the decision to move on or to stop. In that slow, methodical work, they find the living among the dead. 29 men become the denominator in that stark comparison. Their routes into exception may have differed, but the destination is the same. They have crossed the taboo line drawn by culture. Their bodies survive, but the war inside them has only just begun. Try a representative touch. Imagine a badly wounded man clawing his way back from the edge of unconsciousness. He expects a finishing shot, abuse, spit. He expects the worst version of his own propaganda made real. Instead, he finds himself under canvas. His wounds are bandaged. A blanket has weight. Someone has taken the time to clean mud from a cut, to tie off a dressing, to do the small, unglamorous work that keeps a man from slipping away. Someone offers warm water in a cup that does not shake with hatred. The language around him is incomprehensible, but the hands are practical, almost bored with cruelty because cruelty is not the task. This basic human fact, being treated by the enemy, slams into the hardened expectation in his mind that capture means humiliation or death. The sensation of being alive collides with a belief planted deep in his bones, and the impact begins to tear him apart. Relief arrives alongside revulsion. Gratitude rises and is immediately punished by shame. If honor demanded one exit, what does it mean to wake up having missed it? And that is only the beginning. Afterward might come the long silence of questioning. A room, a table, gestures, time measured in waits rather than answers, a question repeated not with rage but with patience, a face searching for meaning across a language gap, a pause that stretches because the words do not come, or because any word feels like confession. That silence need not be defiance. It can be a double isolation of language and of spirit. How do you explain yourself to men you are taught to see as monsters? How do you explain yourself to yourself? How do you face the fact of living on at all? The harshest judge may be the one inside your own head. For a long time, the enemy is not the uniform across the table, but the voice that repeats the old lesson. You should not be here. By existing, these men puncture the myth of no surrender, only to tumble into the vacuum left when the myth breaks. Shame does not vanish because the enemy behaves with relative restraint. It turns inward, becoming a longer, more durable torment that follows the body even when the battle is over. That is the meaning of those 29 men. They prove that no surrender is not a physical law. It is a crushing collective choice made under extreme conditions and under the pressure of an overpowering moral system. And when conditions become so chaotic that doctrine is pierced by biology or sheer accident, a crack appears. In that crack, you see the abyss of individual lives. Yet Attu was not the only thing devoured by war. Before the flames reached the battlefield, roughly 42 indigenous residents on the island had already been forcibly removed by the Japanese and taken far away to Hokkaido, Japan. According to National Park Service records, they were held there for more than 3 years, and nearly half did not survive. This is a page that often lies silent beside the main battle narrative, and it changes the shape of what we think we are looking at. Picture another scene, not a trench, but a village that has suddenly gone dead, people ordered to gather to leave to carry what they can. The order comes with the blunt force of inevitability. There is no argument that will be heard, no appeal that will be honored. Ordinary life freezes in an instant. The hearth goes cold, doors are left unlocked. A pot sits where it was last set down. A child's toy is abandoned in dust. There is no time for proper goodbyes to the places that made them who they were. They are not soldiers. No one drills honor into them as an escape hatch. They are simply ordinary people swept away by the machinery of war, pushed off their land because it is useful to someone else. They too become captives, detainees, displaced, held under guard. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into seasons. They learn what it means to live where every routine depends on someone else's permission. But in their story, there is no paradox of military glory, only the plainest hardship of survival. Separation, uncertainty, illness, the slow erosion of a community under confinement. When nearly half do not return, the loss is not an argument about doctrine. It is absence in the most literal sense. Set these two scenes side by side. The soldier's life or death choice under a rigid belief system and the resident's forced displacement under violence, and the word war reveals a fuller, more brutal face. It demands that some die for an abstract honor, and with the most concrete force, it strips others of the right to live as they had. One narrative is loud with slogans, the other is quiet with emptied rooms. The wind still blows across Attu's desolate shore. What became of those 29 prisoners afterward? Most of their individual stories sank into historical silence. We know only that as a tiny minority, they were entered into the record. And the Attu residents who survived after long detours returned to a homeland reduced to ruin. The battle ended long ago, but the telling of it never reached a ceasefire. Stories kept fighting on, rearranging meaning long after the bodies had been counted. The no-surrender myth was cut and repurposed after the war by different hands, sometimes a symbol of courage, sometimes condemned as blind loyalty. In those grand narratives, people become examples. They become proof. And what gets blurred is what matters most. Those 29 specific men, the specific pain of 42 families, the messy human contradictions that do not fit neatly into a lesson. What they leave behind is not an answer, but a harder question. 2,600 against 29. The number itself is an enduring interrogation. It asks, when a belief system pushes honor to such an extreme that it leaves its believers only one approved exit, death, what exactly is that system truly protecting? And when someone, whether by accident or by the most primitive instinct, slips past that single exit and lives, whose judgment must he then endure? The enemy's perhaps, but also his comrades, his communities, his own. Those 29 exceptions are 29 hairline cracks. Through them we glimpse neither heroes nor traitors, but how war shapes people with doctrine, and how reality then beats doctrine back. How beneath slogans and numbers, each specific person pays a specific price. History's wind keeps blowing, carrying away the smoke, but it leaves the numbers behind. They are more silent than any shout, and for that very reason, they are often more deafening.